We're using an updated NFL mock draft from PFF from Trevor Sikkema, and we're going to be using that to base landing spots and draft capital for a Dynasty rookie mock draft. So instead of screaming at me in the comment section, Mason, oh my gosh, the Minnesota Vikings would never do this. Instead, scream, Mason, oh my gosh, if the Vikings did that, I'm still not taking J.J. McCarthy at that pick. You can get mad at where I'm taking them in the Dynasty rookie mock draft, but not the NFL draft. Starting off with their number one overall pick, we're going to have the same in the rookie draft and in the mock draft. Chicago Bears going with Caleb Williams. Caleb's now going to be stepping into an offense that has DJ Moore, DeAndre Swift, Keenan Allen, and another wide receiver that was taken later on in this mock. But nonetheless, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I mean, Caleb Williams has been penciled in to be a Chicago Bear all offseason if you're looking at Las Vegas sports books. And also, it should be the best Chicago Bears offense that we've seen over the past, I want to say 7-8 seasons now. I think he's going to have great weapons. He has rushing upside. It's a much better roster than what you typically see from a team with the number one overall pick. So I'm very excited to pencil in Caleb Williams here. We're going to be going with Marvin Harrison Jr. immediately after as well. Now, with Harrison, I think a lot of people have him as the consensus 102. If he goes to the Los Angeles Chargers, for sure you have to take him over May. For sure you have to take him ahead of Jaden Daniels. Here in this mock draft, he falls to the Chargers at 5, which still looks unlikely in my mind. I think that the Arizona Cardinals, instead of trading back from the number 4 overall pick, will probably end up taking Harrison. But if he were to go to the Chargers, it's a situation in which you now have no Mike Williams. You now have no Keenan Allen. I was expecting at least one of those guys off the team, just given the contract situations, but not both. So if they're both gone, I mean, I think you're in a very comfortable spot to say, okay, you have the best wide receiver prospect that we've seen since Jamar Chase and even maybe before then, going to a team with an elite level quarterback that has all the target availability in the world, given the fact they have no receivers. So it'd be the perfect player, the perfect landing spot, and great draft capital inside the top 5 picks. Now, we will go with Drake May at 2. Drake May is going to be going to the Washington Commanders here, stepping into a situation where you have Jahan Dotson, stepping into a situation where you have Terry McLaurin. And also, this is a team that takes another wide receiver later on in this draft. Like I said, I think I can go back and forth when you are looking at Drake May versus Jaden Daniels. It will be a situation that I am probably going to be making adjustments with all the way up until the NFL draft. But in this scenario, Drake May finds the better landing spot. He gets more draft capital as well, indicating that, I mean, I don't know, NFL talent evaluators think he's better than Daniels, but Daniels will come in right after. Obviously, Daniels has the rushing upside. So if Jaden Daniels were to go before Drake May in the actual NFL draft, I will tell you right now, I am going to be taking Jaden Daniels ahead of May. I think you can go back and forth on this. And then our next guy is going to be someone that has been a consistent riser here. J.J. McCarthy going to the Vikings at pick 4. Now they would have to trade up with the Arizona Cardinals. This would be the first NFL draft in history where the first 4 picks were quarterbacks. Is that what I'm expecting to happen? Not necessarily, but this is a consistent trend that we have seen with mock drafts as of late, where a lot of people are putting J.J. McCarthy as the number 4 overall pick. And if that were to happen, it doesn't necessarily matter what we thought earlier in the offseason. It doesn't necessarily matter what we think of J.J. McCarthy. At the end of the day, he will have all the job security. He has some rushing upside. He'll be stepping into a phenomenal situation where you have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, and NFL talent evaluators would have been willing to sign off on him being a top 5 selection. So even though if you go to flockfantasy.com, I do not have J.J. McCarthy ranked this high. I am not expecting this to be the case right now, but I think we need to be flexible. And if he were to end up going at this pick, I think you have to move him up dramatically in your rankings. Now, going over to our next spot, we will go with Malik Nabers at 9. I mean, with Nabers, he goes to the Chicago Bears where you have Caleb Williams. Yes, we're very excited about this offense. But you have at the same time Keenan Allen. You have DJ Moore there as well. So, I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, you have a ton of competition for targets in Chicago. I still think Nabers is a phenomenal prospect. Youngest wide receiver prospect in the class. And at the same time, I mean, he was the #1 guy in his PFF grade, #1 in yards per, the youngest, most productive in the class with top competition playing alongside him in Brian Thomas Jr. So I really like the player. I don't love the landing spot. I mean, I think you can make an argument for Rome to possibly go ahead of him, where Rome goes to the New York Giants at 6. It is a better landing spot in terms of you not necessarily having the same level of competition, but it is worse in a way in that you may not have the quarterback play that you're going to get in Chicago. Even though we have not seen Caleb Williams at the NFL level, I'm pretty confident in saying that I expect him to be a better quarterback in terms of the overall passing volume for the Chicago Bears and what we would expect with Daniel Jones and the New York Giants. And obviously, we saw what the Giants did in free agency. It's not like they have another quarterback coming in unless they go out and draft one. And we can see in this mock draft, which they don't. So if you wanted to take Rome ahead of Neighbors in this scenario, knowing that Rome goes higher than him in the NFL draft, knowing that he has less target competition as well, I would understand where you're coming from, but I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to take who I perceive to be the better player. Now, dropping down to our next option, we are going to go with Brock Bowers. Bowers makes it a pick 15, which we kind of seen this consistently at this point where NFL mock drafters are having Brock Bowers in the middle around 1, where previously it was a borderline top 5 pick in a lot of mock drafts. I mean, I know that there's a growing sentiment that you shouldn't take a tight end inside the top 10 picks because when does it ever work out? I mean, a lot of these guys don't do anything on their rookie deals, and instead they're not going to produce until their second contracts anyway. So you're not getting the advantage of the rookie deal. So I understand the thought process. I mean, here he goes to the Indianapolis Colts. It's a good landing spot where this team has been desperate for, I mean, a tight end for quite some time. And at the same time, we know that younger quarterbacks, aka Anthony Richardson, will be a little more likely to lean on their tight ends over the middle. Now, going over to our next guy, we are going to have Brian Thomas Jr. goes to the Buffalo Bills at 28. It's going to be something you see consistently in mock drafts, right? Especially as Buffalo doesn't go out there and make any significant moves at the wide receiver position in free agency. It's not like they bring in Calvin Ridley. Maybe they bring in Mike Williams, but it hasn't necessarily happened yet. And if you look at Brian Thomas Jr., he's pretty much just a better version of what they wanted Gabe Davis to be. He can be that vertical field stretcher, top-end athlete. The production profile is not insane, but that's because he played alongside Malik Neighbors, a 3-year player as well. So I think it would make a lot of sense and obviously be a perfect fit from a real-life perspective, especially if Stephon Diggs keeps tweeting out nonsense. Now, going over to someone that I think we have to move up our rankings. Let me go ahead and pull up flockfantasy.com real quick because Adonai Mitchell obviously crushes the NFL Combine. Adonai Mitchell at the same time has every film evaluator falling in love with him. I mean, people absolutely love this guy. Here in this draft, he ends up going to the Jacksonville Jaguars at 17, which puts him, I mean, clearly as the wide receiver, 4 off this board. If I'm looking at my rankings currently on flockfantasy.com, let me go ahead, hit add expert, Mason Dodd. I right now have Adonai Mitchell as my wide receiver 7. I have him behind Troy Franklin and Xavier Worthy. I think that this will be something that we need to change. We have them all back to back to back inside the same tier. I think I'm going to keep these wide receivers in the same tier, but I think we're going to be moving Adonai ahead of Franklin, ahead of Worthy. If you look at the expert rankings on the site, it looks like every other expert pretty much has Troy Franklin behind both Worthy and Mitchell. So yeah, we're going to move Mitchell up. We'll move Franklin down. Franklin actually gets a good landing spot in this draft. But before we talk about Adonai here, of course, if you're not already a member of the Flock and flockfantasy.com, you can check out all my Dynasty rookie rankings, plus the Dynasty rookie rankings of all your favorite creators that you watch on YouTube as well, plus all the Dynasty rookie draft guides that you could want. We have 3 massive ones on the site, plus our Dynasty trade calculator, Dynasty trade finder, all the whole 9 yards. If you go over to flockfantasy.com and use code FLOCK as well, you're going to get a free week trial, 30% off any sub. And with code FLOCK, yours truly will break down your Dynasty team in a podcast. But nonetheless, if you are looking at Adonai here, the reason I am hesitant, even though the draft capital looks great, even though, I mean, the athleticism looked phenomenal at the combine, even though film guys absolutely love the player, he was still at the very bottom. And I'm not saying middle of the road. I'm not saying below average. I'm talking about very bottom, horrible when it comes to his yards per route run, his yards per team pass attempts, his targets per route run, all of his production measures are garbage. Now you can make the argument, well, Mason, this isn't an Adonai Mitchell. Mason, this is a Quinn Ewers issue. And Huckam Morns, I'm a Texas fan. I'm not in love with Ewers, okay? I'm fine if we want to move on to Manning this next year. But with that being said, you should have still seen him be able to dominate targets. The targets per route run should have still been pretty damn high at either Georgia or Texas, even though it was at the very bottom of the draft class pretty much every step of the way. So he's, in my mind, profiling as a vertical field stretching option that maybe is a better real life wide receiver than he is fantasy. I mean, it would be different if he was middle of the road with all his production measures, but he's like dead last. Now, going over to our next guy, Troy Franklin is someone that the production profile is phenomenal. Here, he finds a landing spot in Kansas City where he goes in the middle of round 2. Obviously, the Chiefs would be a much better landing spot than what you'd have in Jacksonville, but it is difficult knowing one goes in the middle of round 1 versus one goes in the middle of round 2. Anyway, with Franklin, not necessarily a great combine in that he comes in, looks pretty small. Okay, I have everybody in our chat saying chicken legs, chicken legs, chicken legs. Even though someone with chicken legs, I'll say, come on, don't put the disrespect on my man. Phenomenal prospect, yards per route run, targets per route run, yards per team pass attempt, breaks out at an early age, declares at an early age. The size is a little bit of a concern. You want to see him be an elite level athlete at his size, which he was athletic, but not necessarily elite. So he has been a faller through the offseason. The draft capital looks like it may not necessarily be there like it is with AD Mitchell. So I think I'm going to have to go to flockfantasy.com. I think we're going to have to move Franklin behind Mitchell, which I'm sure everybody watching this agrees with. Now, going over to our next guy, we're going to be going with Bo Nix, who goes pick 22 to the Denver Broncos. You know what? I'm sorry. We got to put Bo Nix ahead of Franklin here. Because, I mean, if he goes 22, right, especially with the quarterback room the Denver Broncos currently have, he's guaranteed to be a starting quarterback. Like year 1. He goes out there, he shows anything. This man can skyrocket in value, and this man can be worth 2 future first-round picks in your next year's rookie draft, depending on how he plays year 1. Situation may not necessarily be great, where you're rolling with Cortland Sutton, Marvin Mims at wide receiver, and no Jerry Jeudy here anymore. You have Javonte Williams at running back. Javonte probably below average NFL RB. You have a below average tight end play. Russ just looked very bad. I don't know. All I know is if you're going to give a quarterback that has some rushing upside a guaranteed starting job by taking him in the round 1 of the NFL draft, I think we have to just trust the process and understand if he shows anything, this will be someone that moves up dramatically in Dynasty. We're going to be going Jonathan Brooks next. Jonathan Brooks finds himself with the Dallas Cowboys. And honestly, if it wasn't for Franklin going to the Chiefs, I think we'd have to put Brooks out of him here as well. Just because beautiful landing spot. Tony Pollard no longer there. But they don't really bring in anybody of significance. Jonathan Brooks, if it wasn't for the injury, would easily be the running back 1 in this draft class. It could very still be the running back 1 in the class, even with his injury. Fine receiver, good offense, plenty of touches available. Should start a little bit slower in his career, though, given he's coming off the torn ACL. Now, going over to our next spot, we're going to have Xavier Worthy at 30. Now, with Xavier Worthy, obviously breaks the NFL Combine. Runs a 4.21. I ended up moving him up my Dynasty rookie rankings, not because I think, because he runs faster, he's going to be better at the NFL level. More so because when you run a 4.21, you're guaranteed to be a round 1 NFL draft pick. So if that's the case, obviously is a decent floor when it comes to his overall security. Going over to Baltimore, I think it'd be a decent pick from a real life perspective. But the issue you're going to have with these speedsters, and it's the same reason we weren't drafting John Ross, it's the same reason we weren't drafting Henry Ruggs, is they can be a good real life NFL wide receiver by stretching NFL defenses and creating space underneath for someone like Zay Flowers. While at the same time, they may not necessarily go through and command a ton of target volume themselves. So everybody loves to use like the Deshaun Jackson comp, saying, speedy wide receiver. He's going to be Deshaun Jackson. He'll be great. Where the reality is, no, he'll probably be more so. And I'm not saying Xavier Worthy is going to be this. We're talking about profiles of these speedy guys. A lot of them look more like Marquez Valdes-Scantling, where nobody's really going to give him his credit because he doesn't show up with and any type of receiving volume. Doesn't matter if it's receptions, receiving yards, receiving touchdowns. But because of his speed and what he can do over the top, it allows the overall offense to be more efficient. That's why the Chiefs paid him so much money to get him away from the Packers. Not saying he was worth the money, but that's kind of what these guys are going after. So I think Worthy is a good example of someone that can be good from a real life perspective, while not necessarily translating that to a fantasy world. Where Ladd McConkey may be a little bit different. He goes here to the New England Patriots at 34. Wide open depth chart. You have Jaden Daniels. So honestly, a pick that I think has a lot of upside. Very difficult to evaluate from a production profile standpoint, just given the fact that he was injured this final year at Georgia. I mean, he is a late declare, late breakout, not hyper productive, but a lot of that has to do with the fact that he wasn't really on the football field. So I think you're more so wanting to trust the film evaluators, even though I'll be a little bit hesitant. Now, going over to our next guy, we'll have Michael Penix Jr. I think this would make a lot of sense for the Raiders, right? I mean, you go out there, you sign Gardner Minshew, you say, okay, worst case scenario, we have a viable quarterback that we can't start this next season. Let's take a shot on a quarterback that maybe won't be anything, but I mean, hell, if he does turn into something, that's great. In round 2, in round 3 at a very cheap cost. So taking Michael Penix Jr. wouldn't be guaranteed to start year 1. I think it would be more so a competition with Gardner, but it could be a Will Levis type situation where if he gets in the game for any reason and he shows anything, you could get that spike in value. Now going over to our next guy, we'll have Trey Benson going pick 95 to the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, obviously you are in a spot in which Clyde Edwards-Helaire, massive bust. Isaiah Pacheco comes from nowhere with no NFL draft capital. And everybody loves Pacheco at this point, which I completely understand why, right? But with that being said, Isaiah Pacheco is still a running back that doesn't really have much invested into him, doesn't have much pedigree. I think if the Chiefs go out there and take Trey Benson round 3, it's not necessarily Benson's job, but I think it is a competition. I think that you could see these running backs playing for the starting role, and Trey Benson, obviously great athleticism at the combine with the size to be a 3-down player. Now, our next guy will be Keon Coleman. Very similar to Adonai. Y'all know I'm not a big Keon guy. The production profile, very bad. The difference with Keon Coleman is he didn't go to the NFL Combine and surprise people in a positive way. He went to the NFL Combine and surprised people in a negative way. It's still very big, right? So the RAS score looks good. Finding himself at Houston, I think it would be a very good real life situation where you can just continue to fill out this wide receiver core, and now you add in some size. Obviously, Nico Collins, not necessarily small, but you want some size running alongside Tank Dell as well. So I think it makes sense from a real life perspective, but I think Keon Coleman would be the wide receiver 3 in Houston. Now, if it was Brian Thomas Jr., completely different story, but Keon Coleman, I think he'd be the wide receiver 3. Now we'll go Ricky Pearsall here at 35. Goes to the Arizona Cardinals, where pretty sneaky good situation, right? Trey McBride's really the only competition that you have for targets. The draft capital looks legit as well. I mean, kind of a similar situation. Our next spot, Xavier Legette, 39. Not a big Xavier Legette fan. We've said it over and over again. I mean, this is a guy that is extremely old. Didn't break out till his like final year at South Carolina. 9 times out of 10, that profile screams, stay away, stay away, stay away. You don't want anything to do with them. But, I mean, you get the draft capital where you're pretty much guaranteed to have a role here. And at the same time, I don't know. It's very easy depth chart to work through where you're only competing with Deontay. Now, Jalen Polk will be our next guy at 50. With Polk, I mean, I don't want to say impossible to evaluate for us, but, I mean, you can't just look at his raw numbers given the fact that he played alongside Rome. He played alongside Jalen McMillan. So at the end of the day, it's a situation in which the competition capped his overall upside and what he could see in Washington. You can't hold this production profile against him because of the very unique situation that he was in. So I think you have to trust the NFL talent evaluators and trust the film guys with this. Now, our next wide receiver will be Roman Wilson. With Roman, I mean, we'll throw Blake here as well. They're both Michigan players. It's just very difficult to evaluate them in such a unique offense that was going out there and just running the ball, running the ball, running the ball, running the ball, as well as if you're going to listen to talent evaluators where they're saying, okay, JJ McCarthy's actually a great quarterback. He's going to go top 5 of the NFL draft. If you're telling yourself that story, maybe it does look like Roman is not as appealing as you would initially assume. Blake is an interesting spot here with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 92 in that I don't necessarily think they want to use Rachaad White as a 3-down back. I think it'd make a lot of sense to bring in another running back of this ilk with limited investment into him and then just operate in a running back by committee and use both running backs with their overall strengths and not necessarily have to have them on the field where you don't need Blake on the field 3rd and long. You don't need Rachaad White on the field, 2nd and 1 or 2nd and goal on the 1-yard line. Now, Jatavion Sanders will be our next guy, 65. Hogan Lawrence, difficult to evaluate him from a production profile standpoint as well. You're playing alongside Adonai, Jonathan Brooks, and Xavier Worthy. Ton of NFL caliber talent on this Texas roster. So it's difficult to say one for one, okay, he is a bona fide stud. We can for sure count on. But we can say, okay, he has upside. Looked pretty damn good at Texas. Decent athlete, decent draft capital, decent landing spot. Malachi Corley will be our next guy, operating extremely close to the line of scrimmage, not necessarily running real routes deep downfield. But with that being said, he dominates with targets, dominates with the yards per route run. Production profile standpoint looks great. He's just not necessarily running real routes. Looks like Brian Edwards from back in the day. Obviously, very small school as well with Western Kentucky. But it's a Jets offense that really needs wide receiver depth. Hopefully, it's pretty good if Aaron Rodgers does look anything like he used to. So, yeah, we're going to take him here. Johnny Wilson will be our next guy, 67. So with Johnny Wilson, I've said it before, but he's kind of my deep guy to look at in terms of if you were like in the very last round of an underdog draft. We were saying this before the combine, but he has a pretty good combine. He also goes out there and outproduces Keon Coleman. Now, of course, I'm going to rank Keon Coleman over him for a couple different reasons. I do think that you have to be a little bit lower when it comes to Johnny Wilson than Keon Coleman, considering the fact that this is a much older player. So even though he was more productive than Keon at Florida State, you'd have to be making that adjustment as well. Jalen McMillan will be our next guy, 77. It makes it to round 3. Then you have to take Jalen Polk over him. Jalen Polk goes round 2 to the Eagles. He has competition in the form of Devontae Adams here in Las Vegas, but it's not like Adams going to be there forever. We're going to go Tez Walker, 80 to the Cincinnati Bengals. Pretty much hoping that he turns into Tyler Boyd. I don't know. And then we'll go Javon Baker at 63. I understand y'all probably want to scream at me. Mason, where's Marshawn Lloyd? Mason, where's the Tennessee back? Mason, where are these other running backs? They fell in this NFL mock draft. Okay. Yes, I would have a couple other running backs if they go at the very top of round 4 ahead of these guys like Javon Baker, ahead of these guys like Tez Walker. I will be talking more in depth about this running back class in a video later this week. So just subscribe if you're not already, especially if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football. And of course, if you want access to all my Dynasty rankings, where we do talk about Jalen Wright, we talk about Marshawn Lloyd, you can find all that on flockfantasy.com as well as Dynasty Rookie Draft Guides. Promo code FLOCK, it's going to get you 30% off any sub, plus our Dynasty Fantasy Football rankings, a free week trial, all the premium content from all your favorite creators, and code FLOCK, we get yours truly to break down your Dynasty team in a podcast. That's all I got for you. Appreciate you. Hope you have a great day, and hope we get to see you out with the video tomorrow.